So some men ask, with all the porn out there, some guys are asking if anime porn is any different. Since the characters aren't exactly real, is it okay to watch that instead of regular porn? And is it a harmless alternative? Because there's just so much porn out there in general these days, and it seems like it's only getting crazier. So the question is, what kind of damage is it doing? And if there's anything else people should be aware of? What's your take?
Yeah, so the first part of the question is anime porn or is it hentai, whether it's a sin? And according to Muslim scholars, it is a sin because if you're watching something to arouse, to heighten arousal or to excite outside of with your lawful partner, then it's considered to be a sin, even though there's no physical contact with a human being. And that also includes, it's the same as like looking at pornographic images of human beings or whether they give consent or not. So that hopefully that answers the first part of your question. But in terms of people using it as, what did you mention? People using it instead of committing zina, is that what you mentioned?
As an alternative, yeah.
As an alternative. I mean, yes, some people do that, and some people, they consider it to be the lesser of two evils because they will say they might justify themselves that rather than committing actual zina, which is obviously illicit sexual intercourse with another human being, they would rather either watch pornography or watch anime porn, and in their minds they will kind of consider it to be less of a sin. Now, my issue with that is that there are other potentially psychological effects and damage that can result by watching anime porn. Some people say it can lead to some addiction. Some professionals and experts also talk about that it can rewire your brain and even your views about women and intimacy and sexuality. And it could also lead to some people feeling that, and it does happen where some people actually feel that watching these type of images, it turns them on and it rouses them more than actual human being. So if, for example, someone is unmarried and they think, okay, let me watch this and it gets me off, helps me release. And then inshallah, when I get married, then I can start obviously having relations with my wife. What can happen is if you've been watching and consuming this type of content for so long, after a while, you might feel that you aren't able to become aroused with an actual human being, with your wife. And that there are many people, unfortunately, many men who are struggling with that. And there are, in addition to anime porn, which unfortunately is very common and popular amongst men, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, we've also now got the rise of what is known as deep pan porn, or it's a form of AI, artificial intelligence, where people will use the images sometimes of like celebrities or people like well-known, and they'll use that image, like their face, and they'll impose it on, like they'll create somewhat of a fake body, and they'll use that to obviously as a form of like pornography as well. And again, this is going into the world of AI, and it is quite scary because, like I said, some people, they think, oh, because there's no human to human contact, it's not technically actual zina under the Sharia, but it's a form of zina. It's zina of the eye, and arguably it can be just as damaging to the human psyche, to the human soul, as actual zina with a human being. So I definitely do advise brothers, men, to avoid such things, because in a way, I would say it kind of like opens a Pandora's box where someone might feel it's fairly innocent or it's not as bad as the real thing meaning actual zina, but the damages that I've seen, and I've seen also from studies, it's arguably far worse than some actually committing than zina itself. So yeah, whether it's in the form of AI, whether it's in the form of watching anime porn, or even visiting prostitutes, because that's also something that's quite common, unfortunately, even amongst married men, where they look at it like this is just transactional sex. It's sex with no emotion, with no connection. I just essentially pay the woman to leave. That's how they rationalize it to themselves. But the problem with that is that when you are the person that you're having intimate relations with, the sex worker, she is there, similar to a porn star. She is there to fulfill all your desires. She is there to exaggerate and kind of make you feel like you're the greatest man on earth, the greatest lover. So this feeds your ego, and you can fall in love with such a woman because you think this is the norm. And then when you actually have intimate relations with your wife, where it's not always going to be like that, you're not always going to get your way, you're not always going to be turned on, and things like that. You will now feel that the sex that you're having with your wife is somewhat not as satisfying because she doesn't compare to the escort, the prostitute. So this is also, like I said, it's a problem amongst married men and non-married men. Although I know sometimes people think that it's only people that are not married who are struggling with these type of things. A number of married men who unfortunately are soliciting sex workers, and they do also become somewhat addicted to this type of service. So again, like I said, it's definitely open a Pandora's box, and I definitely wouldn't advise or recommend anyone to kind of go down that path. If someone is currently, having an issue or struggling with whether it's anime, porn, AI, or prostitution, constantly visiting prostitution, then obviously I would recommend someone seek professional help with that. It might be difficult to obviously have that conversation with one's wife or family, because there's a lot of shame and stigma attached towards such acts. Rightly so, but at the same time, it's important that people are aware that help is available, and you can again speak to other maybe professionals or even some men who might be struggling with this, or men who've overcome this, because like I said, as Muslims, we tend to shy away from such matters and think that it doesn't happen or it's not affecting people who have Iman or people are practicing, when I can tell you, like, it does affect a lot of people who are practicing, who are religious, who do love Allah and His Messenger, who do visit the mosque. So again, for the people that are struggling with it, please seek help, and obviously make sure you make a constant dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also for those who are thinking about going down that route, I will strongly advise it. I would advise you don't go down that route.
Well, there was a recent study discussing the impact of anime pornography versus real pornography on the human mind. Interestingly, it found that anime pornography tends to have more of a negative effect, because you see in Japan, where a lot of these animes originate, many young men prefer the animated version over the real pornography. The reason? The anime characters have these unrealistic perfect bodies that are hard to achieve in real life without surgery. So the study found that the unrealistic expectations derived from watching anime pornography were worse than that watching real life pornography. People lost interest in the real stuff because the animated characters seemed more ideal. They could be portrayed as doing anything, given it's just drawings and they're very unrealistic. So in essence, anime pornography led to more unrealistic standards and expectations of the human form compared to real life pornography, which to me is a reminder that what we consume can have a significant impact on our perceptions and desires, even if it's just animated. So yeah, what's your take on that?
I agree 100%. I just think, by way of an analogy that maybe people can, or I can definitely relate to, is if I were to compare processed food to like natural food, like, and because I went through a period where, especially in my late teens, I was eating a lot of processed food, so much so that I preferred processed food with a lot. Again, I was about processed food with a lot of sugar as well, compared to like natural food, like even like strawberries, and it tasted bland.
Yeah.
And then I went through a period where I stopped or significantly reduced eating processed food, and then I got accustomed again to eating more wholesome food, and all of a sudden organic food, and then I was able to appreciate the natural fruits and vegetables that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created for us. And it's a thing where, like I said, if you keep eating processed food and that's all you eat, your palate can change. So much so, because again, what your preference is, what your preference, and this is where it's troubling, because again, if someone has been watching anime porn or like deep fake or deep fake porn for a considerable amount of time, and then that becomes their preference. Now, as far as they're concerned, it's not their fault that they're not aroused by a woman, a real woman, because they've got, like you said, this artificial image, but it's specifically created according to what they consider to be perfect, when no human being is perfect. So there is so much destruction in such images. And because I think a lot of people initially think it's harmless because they don't see the immediate effects, but long term, and like you mentioned, the study that you referred to, it's very destructive, not only for society and families, but the person themselves. And I just think that men should definitely be more cognizant of that and not consider it to be like like it's harmless and it's not going to affect them, because although they may not see no physical effects short term, but long term, there's a lot of psychological effects for that particular individual and society at large. So I definitely think it's something that those type of studies and testimonies need to be spoken about more, for people to kind of be aware Because the thing is, when we're speaking about porn, ultimately it's about self-policing. As much as, again, you can have obviously with children, then obviously a parent can try and deter their child from watching certain things. But once a human being gets past the age of, I would say, 12, 13, 14, it's about themselves, because there's only so much even that the parent can do. If someone wants to, and it's very easy to access, those type of images. So, but if the person themselves is like, obviously they have a form of taqwa where it's a form of restraint, I'm not going to, because you can watch it, I'm not going to watch X, Y, and Z for my own reasons. It's definitely better. But I think because many people don't think about the negative consequences and implications, and you can quote unquote get away with it because no one is necessarily going to monitor your porn habit. People just don't think can fall into it. So I definitely think, like I said, those studies need to be shared more frequently, and people who are struggling with it, it's important to come to amplify those voices. So hopefully people who are not started looking at porn or those type of anime porn can not open the Pandora's box, shall we say.
Okay, so on to the next question. Some people might say, oh, life was easier back then. The companions didn't have to deal with the constant temptation of pornography that we face today. But remember what life was like during the Quraysh of Mecca. They were surrounded by idolatry, social pressure, the violence against those who believed in one God. Every day was a test of their faith. So what's your take? What do you have to say to people that have this opinion?
I will say they don't know history. That's not the case at all. Because I would argue they had it just as difficult. And I'll try and explain the reason why I say that. I mean, nowadays people, yes, porn is something that's relatively new. They didn't have access to online pornography as we do have now, but they had access to, and I need to make sure that it's in the context of what I'm saying, because some people might be shocked by what I'm going to say. This idea that in traditional Muslim societies, even from the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, to the great era, the subsequent centuries after that this idea that there was no half-naked women around is a lie. Because even before the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, it is well documented that a number of the pagans, the idol worshippers, they used to perform tawaf around the Kaaba naked, men and women. So this is well documented. There were different types of sexual relations that were considered to be, before Islam, socially acceptable in the Arabian Peninsula. There was prostitution. There was what we would consider to be wife swapping, where people would swap their wives or their girlfriends with other men. There was practices where a woman would have like a red flag outside of her tent, where she would sleep with multiple men, up to 10 sometimes. And if she were to give birth, she would pick whoever she wants to be the father of her child. And this is reported by Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her. She spoke about, before Islam, there was different types of nikah that was considered to be socially acceptable. But when the Prophet ﷺ came, then he prohibited all of those types of nikah, apart from the nikah that we have now. So my point is, during the time of the Prophet, peace upon him, the companions, they were raised in a society where people were hypersexualized. People were promiscuous. Promiscuous was the norm. Men had multiple sexual partners by way of marriage and concubinage, which concubinage refers to slave girls. And even when Islam came, and this is again something that many Muslims are not aware of, because I think we like to romanticize Islamic past and Muslim history, and we sanitize some parts of our history that we are uncomfortable about, and especially in relation to slave girls, jawari. So the slave girls is something that in Islam, so even when we talk about the hijab, we know that hijab is legislated for Muslim women. But what many people do not realize, especially in this modern day age, the hijab is legislated for free Muslim women. So if a woman is a slave, she doesn't have to wear hijab. She doesn't have to wear hijab. The hijab of a slave woman is the same as the aura of a slave Muslim woman is the same as the aura of a Muslim man, which is between the navel and the belly button, right? That is the aura. And during the time of like Umar bin Khattab, is well documented, Imam Malik, there used to be half naked women in terms of their breasts, and their hair was exposed, and no one said anything because it wasn't required of them. The same way non-Muslim women are not required to wear hijab. So for non-Muslim woman is not required to wear hijab, and she's walking about minding her own business, it's not for Muslim to say what you should cover up, because it's not required of her. So it's important again that Muslims realize this, because there are some reports that because there's one famous report where Umar bin Khattab, he saw a slave woman who was wearing the hijab, the full hijab and jilbab, and he reprimanded her and he said that you shouldn't be wearing this. This is only for free Muslim women. So she was ordered to take this off because he was a caliph at that time. And there are other reports that mention that some of his slave girls, that when they used to serve some of the men, like his friends, when they used to come to his house, one of the reports said that she was like an attractive lady, and you could even her breast was knocking, and you could see her ankles. And the reason why I'm saying this is because a woman is half naked, or her breasts are out, or her hair is exposed. It doesn't mean that a man can act upon her or like force himself upon her. He has to lower his gaze and have self-restraint. The same way, if you are walking and you see a woman, whether she's Muslim or non-Muslim, half naked, her breasts are out, the onus is on you. Allah said, tell the believing men to lower their gaze and guard their private parts. But unfortunately, again, I think as Muslims, we like to give this, and some Muslim societies now, in the modern day age, they've made it more or less like the complete uniform for a woman, whether she's Muslim or non-Muslim, she has to completely cover up. And a lot of that is because they want to protect the men. But if you look at traditionally how these verses was revealed and how it's understood, the onus was placed on men to look away. If you're aroused or you find a woman very attractive, you look away. There's examples during the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, where he was amongst his companions and he saw a woman who was very attractive and he was attracted by her. Then he went to his wife Zainab, had relations with her, then came out. And when he came out back to his companions, it was reported that his hair was dripping with water. And the companions, they asked, they said, did something happen? What happened? The Prophet said, Ya Rasulullah, what happened? The Messenger of Allah. And he said that he saw a woman that he found attractive, but he went to his wife to fulfill his desires. And then he used it as an example that this is what any of you should do if you're obviously enticed by a woman. And he didn't put any blame on the woman. He didn't say the woman should cover up. Likewise, when he was at Hajj in Mecca, and he was a beautiful woman, and he mentioned a beautiful woman, I'm explicitly saying a beautiful woman, approached him and asked him a question. Then the Fadl ibn Abbas was a young man at the time and also was a handsome man, it was described. He was looking at the woman because he was amazed by her beauty. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, he just turned the young man's head away. He didn't rebuke the woman. He told the man, so my point in to all like these examples is accountability of the men. Because there was attractive women around. Now, there was even so much so that sometimes when they used to go on military expeditions, and sometimes they didn't have like a wife or their female slave where they can have lawful relations, some of the companions used to complain and they found it very difficult, and they asked the Prophet, can we castrate ourselves? Can we cut off our penis because we can't take it anymore? The Prophet said no. He didn't permit that. So my point is that, and they had a very high sex drive compared to us, because a lot of the verses, even in relation to Ramadan about fasting, we're more concerned with the food, no food and no drink. They were more concerned with how can I go about having intimate relations. And if you read again, like I said, a lot of the commentary from the Quran and Hadith, a lot of the stories revolve around them struggling with their desires. So if you've got, and again, they had real people, real women, beautiful women. There was obviously Muslim women who were hijab wearing, free women. There were some slave women who were beautiful as well, some who were Muslim, some who were non-Muslim. And obviously there was also non-Muslim women as well who they were enticed by. And Allah also mentions in the Quran when he's referring to that if you, because again, as Muslims, I think like I said, when we romanticize Islamic history, we have this idea that Muslims are only attracted to Muslim women. No, Muslims are attracted to women, like men, whether she's Muslim or non-Muslim. And there may be a time where, like there was a companion who, prior to Islam, he had relations with a prostitute, an escort, right? And both of them became Muslim, but then he went to see her and he was talking to her and he raised his hand, he put forth his hand, he wanted to touch her. Then she told him, well, like, what are you doing? Allah's came and prohibited that. Then as he walked away and his face hit the wall. And he went to tell the Prophet, peace be upon him, what happened. And then the Prophet said, Allah wants good for his believers, for his slaves. And he said, sometimes Allah will expiate or erase a bad deed with a good, erase to kind of cleanse someone who's done something bad, something else will happen. So that was like an example that you did something wrong, and then that's like your recompense kind of thing. So I'm saying all of these stories to say that yes, whilst they didn't have pornography as we have it, but they had real. It's like if I tell someone, okay, if you were to go to, okay, someone who's maybe living in a very conservative society, and then they will go to a country like, or a city like Miami or Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, where there's a lot of beautiful women, maybe half naked in their beach attire. It's going to be very enticing. But that's just a reality, but you have to deal with it. Now, of course, some people avoid going, but my point is, as Muslims traveled, and especially as Islam, they were coming across beautiful women from different parts of the world, but you still had to deal with it. And again, I just think that we like to, and I would argue that although we talk a lot about this society nowadays is hypersexualized, I would argue that a lot of us as Muslims, we've become hyper modest or extremely prudish to the point where we feel that we can't control ourselves. And I don't think that's the case. I think that we need to have a balance where, yes, if we know that we might be struggling with certain things to lower our gaze, but we have the ability and the power, the capability which Allah has granted us to control ourselves. So this idea that we're in a new age where, I can't control myself from watching pornography, that's a lie. Everyone can control yourself. It's within your power, within your capability that Allah's granted you. But this idea that, and I just think that rhetoric is quite dangerous, because this idea that we can't control ourselves because pornography is so accessible, things like that, that type of thinking and the mindset is why some men even are led to believe that if a woman is, for example, half dressed or she's not dressed appropriately, this, that, and the other, you can't blame a man for harassing her or jumping on her or doing all of these things. And that's completely not Islamic. And again, the reason why I use the example of the half-naked, half-dressed women during traditional Islam was because they had this fitna themselves, but they weren't allowed to act upon it. And if anyone did act upon it, they were rebuked. There were like the one lady who went to pray for Fajr, and a man forced himself on her and raped her. When the Prophet found out about this, he punished the man and executed him. And he was a Muslim. So it's important that this idea that we're not condoning any type of sexual violence or rape, but it does happen, but no blame should be placed on the woman because of how she's dressed. And likewise, because there's pornography and social media and all of these women around, this idea that, I just think a lot of Muslims, whether it's during the time of Medina, whether it's during Baghdad in the so-called golden age of the Abbasid era between the 9th and the 13th century in particular, whether it's the period of Andalusia, Islamic Spain, if you read the books of many of the scholars, the historians, they talk about there were so many beautiful women about. Because they were coming across, and you can imagine, if you've been living in a desert, you don't really, and maybe most of the women generally are covered. Even the slaves are quite covered, even the slave women, even though there wasn't required to wear the hijab and jilbab. Then you go to maybe like Europe for the first time and you're seeing, and they spoke about this, these blue-eyed, blonde-haired women, they were attracted by these women. So they had this fitna. But again, this idea that I would say, and I just think it's, again, the same way, I think it's more of the mindset of maybe people thinking that virtual sex is the same or is better than real sex. That is something that's definitely new, where people are thinking, actually, I would actually prefer to have relations with someone that's not actually real than to have intimate relation with a real person. That is definitely new, because obviously they didn't have that in the past. So it's a greater fit in that respect. But every period has had trials and tribulations. So this idea that, we're in a new age and we've never been exposed to this much type of sexual temptation, it's definitely not true. Like I said, if you read history, if you read our Islamic history, people will be very uncomfortable with how in some areas, unfortunately as well, it was quite hypersexualized, and there was a lot of even zina that was proliferated. And that's one of the reasons why historians and scholars mention why the Muslim empire in the Ottoman period fell, was because Muslims were extremely licentious, were extremely having so much casual sex, which is not Islamic, because they had so much wealth and power. So again, I just think if you read history the same way, if you read the history of the people of Pompeii in Italy and what happened to them in ancient Greeks, and how they were having so much casual sex, even to the point of having a lot of sex with even young boys and things like that. And even to till this day, you have images like of graveyards. I went to visit Naples, I think in 2022. No, last year. Sorry, no, last year, and you can see images of today of like their brothels, and it shows these are the hypersexualized people, and this is again probably why they what led to their destruction. Allah knows best the reason why, but my point is that every era has those periods where when people have got a lot of wealth and power, sometimes they indulge to excesses. So if anything, I would say that maybe the individual person has the same type of maybe fitna as maybe what an average king had in the past in terms of having access to many like beautiful women. But the onus again is still on you as an individual to practice self-restraint, to practice sexual discipline, and to seek the aid from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I don't think we should subscribe to this victim mentality, like I'm helpless, it's out of my control. We've got it really bad, they've never had it as bad as us, because yeah, like I said, if you read history, that's definitely not the case.
Right. Okay. What is a way, or what are some ways for a man to get himself off pornography?
There's a number of things. First and foremost, one needs to have inner resolve, and I use this based on the model from the 12 steps model, which is used for sex and love in porn addicts, and they use this 12 steps model, which was developed initially for Alcoholics Anonymous, for people struggling with alcohol, but they lay out 12 steps. And if what's quite interesting is all of these steps, or most of these steps, are Islamic in nature, in the sense that first and foremost, they tell the people, and they say this when they have their meetings in their circles, that realize that it is only the higher power, or Allah, who can help you. Meaning submit to a higher authority. And although the person, again, is struggling with pornography, it's good that that they know they have a problem. So then they're going to try and find a solution for it. But then where are they going to seek help from? First and foremost, seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's obviously by way of, first and foremost, prayer, making constant dua, and reflecting on the fact that you are in need of help. That's the first thing. And I don't want to underestimate the power of seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the power of prayer. Then after that, it's then actually to be proactive in the sense of what are your trigger points. Everyone is different. If, for example, there are some people who they're okay, like they are functional addicts, shall we say, functional porn addicts, where no one would be none the wiser. They might be living a normal life, but when they are, as we mentioned like last week, maybe at times when they're by themselves, maybe after 10, 11 o'clock, that's when they get the urge. Then it's a case of, okay, if that's what your trigger points, or that's the periods where you're most susceptible, you maybe need to remove devices from your surrounding. You might need to put blockers on your however you're going to access the porn, especially obviously if it's on your phone, if it's on your laptop, and there are programs and stuff that can do that. And the reason why I'm saying these, it comes obviously counseling and other things, but the stuff because a lot of people watch porn, especially with online porn, it requires the person themselves, because no one is going to be with you 24/7. It's not like before, where if someone was struggling having affairs or visiting escorts and things like that, that's different. They can maybe move to a different location or avoid those individuals. Whereas this type of trial, this tribulation, this addiction, it definitely involves a person, because like I said, it's very easy to open up your phone, to go onto Twitter or X, or porn is free. So it's not even like someone needs to pay for it. So that's why, again, it's important that someone, without being a recluse and living in a mountain, they have to understand themselves what are their trigger points, because even someone who's the most addicted person who's really struggling with porn, there are periods where they're not affected by it. Like, for example, when they're with their friends, maybe when they're with their family, very rarely would you see someone feel, I've got such the urge, because they've got a sense of shame. So it's probably when they are by themselves. So again, it's the periods where they know they're going to be by themselves, that they're likely to be enticed by it. They need to do certain things to make sure, because you can all say, we could say obviously go to the gym, keep yourself busy, fast, and these are all well and good. But what about those periods when you're not fasting? You finish from the gym, you've got some free time, idle time on your hand. That's when you're going to be more susceptible for it. So again, it's about the times when you're susceptible to it. I would definitely recommend, I'm not going to say, obviously, whether it's really bad, you might need to do something with your phone, but you need to put barriers or in place on your phone or your mobile to stop you, that you won't be allowed to watch the porn. And some people, I've listened to some people who've like overcome porn addiction. They've also said that there's a certain app where their phone can be connected to like kind of like their browser history or whatever they look at to someone else's phone. And one particular man I was listening to, he said he did that with his wife's phone because he knew that obviously if his wife saw what he was looking at, he would feel a sense of shame. But obviously if it was him by himself, then he's more likely to do it. So he did that. He said that helped him. I think speaking to other, because everyone is individual, speaking to other people struggled with it and see what works for them, because I don't think it's like one particular way fits all. Then there is obviously the things like what we spoke about previously about maybe going to the gym. Obviously counseling is very important, but I think ultimately one needs to be proactive in the sense that, okay, I've got a problem, this is my weak spot, and then try to kind of identify how I can eradicate those triggers, because some people, they do feel a sense of shame after they've watched porn. And then there are other people who, and you mentioned this before, like about, after they get post-nut clarity, they feel like repulsed by it. There's some people who don't feel anything whatsoever. Like it's just a release. So that's why, again, it's very difficult to give a blanket answer. But for the person who's struggling with it, then they know that they've got a problem. So if they know they've got a problem, then you need to identify, okay, when are the times when I'm more susceptible, like I said, and try and eradicate the trigger points to kind of make you want to consume porn again. And definitely, again, like I said, definitely go and check like a counselor or a therapist that can help guide in terms of how to overcome it.
So I came across a study recently, not exactly Islamic, called the weaning method. It's like weaning a baby off breast milk, a gradual process, like a nicotine patch for smokers. It reduces cravings. So could something similar work for those struggling with pornography? So instead of calling it an addiction, let's say someone has a pornography problem. This method proposes a step-by-step approach. You make an intention to quit, then have a conversation with yourself. If you normally watch porn daily or every other day, the first step might be going 4 days without it. Now the study, again, not Islamic, suggests a reward on the 4th day, which wouldn't be appropriate here, let's say, to watch porn after the 4th day. But after those 4 days, you will set a new goal, maybe 6 days. So you go 6 days after 4 days, then a week and a half, then 2 weeks, a month, and so on. The idea is over time, the cravings lessen. You create an environment with distractions, and eventually you don't crave it as much anymore. You've weaned yourself off like a baby with breast milk transitioning to solid food. It's a slow process, not immediate. So the question is, how can we adapt this weaning method to fit with Islamic principles?
Do you know what's really interesting? It's like when you said it's not Islamic, I don't see what is un-Islamic about that particular method. And this is something that even as Muslims, we shouldn't be afraid to adopt or incorporate methods and techniques that obviously something, as long as it's not clearly going against Islamic principles, and attach the Islamic label to them. And this is something that scholars did in the past when I spoke about erytology, in the sense where they were coming across practices or techniques that ancient Greeks or ancient Indians had spoke about in terms of how to sexually satisfy their partner, and they used this and spoke about this within their books, and we now consider that to be Islamic. So likewise, that weaning method and that approach, that makes complete sense. And I just think ultimately it's the way, from what you're saying, the way it's taught is like take a step-by-step approach. Because again, I think some people, especially if they feel, let's just to use the term addicted for this case, like feel that they're addicted to porn, similar to maybe like cigarettes or alcohol. For them, the idea of like completely stopping altogether is not going to happen. So you might need to take a step-by-step. That's give yourself a small target, like you mentioned, maybe 4 days, maybe 2 days. Then see what happens after that. That's it's not to say that you're giving the person license after the 4 days or 2 days to watch pornography, but if they do indulge, then they have to make sure after maybe like the 3rd or 4th day, they start again. But this time, instead of it being 4 days, now you have to do 6 days. Then after the 6 days, if you pass that, now you have to do 8 days. If, for example, they failed or they relapsed and start watching porn, maybe start from scratch again and do 4 days again, because you need to build it up. So again, the same way, like I said, we are all going to sin. and we all do sin. But it's not like Islam says give you the license to sin, but Allah in His Messenger speaks about if you sin or when you sin, this you need to make repentance. You need to seek Allah for forgiveness, even though we know that, even though we don't want to sin, and we're going to sin repeatedly. So the way that weaning method is kind of explained, it makes complete sense because, again, I think from how you've explained it, it's helping the person realize that actually I don't really need this. I'm not consumed by this as I thought I was. It doesn't take over my life as I thought it does, because anyone who is an addict or feels like they're an addict or feels like this is out of their control, they feel like they can't live without it, but they can't stop doing it. So like you mentioned with that weaning method, it's just telling the person that, giving them small, bite-sized tasks. Once they've achieved it, then they can maybe like reward themselves with something. Then they do another, like either a longer stint of 6 days or then 8 days or 12 days. So for me, again, I think that, and if it's proven to be effective, I don't see why that can't be taught to Muslims and just to be practical, because like when I mentioned like the different methods of overcoming pornography, I'm not giving methods that are directly mentioned in the Quran or the Hadith because there isn't any precedent for that. These are just examples, like I said, whether it's going to support groups, whether it's being aware of your trigger points, whether it's cognitive behavior therapy, CBT, sorry, or like the weaning method that you spoke about, proven effective methods that people who have used is to implement that. It might be the case, like if we just, again, for me, because I think a lot of these principles or these styles, there is a basis in the Quran and Sunnah. That's why I'm bringing it back so that we don't feel alienated, so that we don't feel, oh, I can't find any guidance from our religious text. I just need to go to Muslims. I would say that a lot of the guidance is in our tradition, but we just need to contextualize it and modernize it for people to kind of understand. And the reason why I say that, I'll give the example of the young man, and many of us know the hadith, the young man who went to the Prophet, peace be upon him. And this was a young man, the scholars have mentioned, that had a lot of intimate relations outside of marriage, committed zina. And he went to the Prophet, he's a Muslim now. He went to the Prophet and he asked the Prophet, can you make zina halal for me? Now, what is beautiful about the Prophet's reaction, he didn't, and the people at the time were like, they were insulting, like, how can you say such a thing? And then the Prophet, he told the people to like stay back, and he just asked the young man to come closer to him. And the Prophet didn't say, that's haram. There's going to be punishment for that. What Muslims would generally say nowadays. He knew it was haram, but he asked, can you make it halal for me? Because he wanted to have sex with multiple women. And the Prophet he rationed with him. He just rationalized the issue and he said that, would you like that for different members of your family? And the man said, of course he wouldn't. Then he just said, likewise, people wouldn't like that. People wouldn't like you to do that with their female members of their family, as in having sex without committing to them, without treating them with honor and being responsible. So again, he used a method where he appealed to the man's sensibility, where he didn't just say it's haram. Do you understand? So my point, and that's a type of counseling, of being empathetic and being compassionate. So I just think we can adopt a similar approach. And I'm not saying we use that word in verbatim, but I'm saying that we've got principle that just saying something is haram, it's not going to make a person stop watching pornography, because a person knows it's haram. So what they're asking for is, okay, I know it's haram. That's why I'm asking for help, which is the first point, which is most important. Now, can you give me effective methods to help me overcome this? And the weaning method, like outlined, it could be an effective method. And I don't think we as Muslims should be afraid of speaking and using and adopting such practice to kind of help people. I'm being realistic, like I said. Just the last point I would say is, and scholars and Muslims do use this. If, for example, you've got a new Muslim, right? Someone that's embraced Islam, they don't know a word of Arabic, and they're struggling. They're struggling to recite, they can't memorize Fatiha, another surah, all of the different du'as that you have to mention in the ruku' and sujood, and they're worried that my prayer's going to be nullified. Now, obviously, in that type of situation, scholars have said, if you just say, maybe Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, say what you can recite, and then some will say, even a little bit in your own language, to ease them in. Now, if someone were to say, how long can I do this for? It's on a case-by-case basis, that's my point. And I just think that compassionate approach of being realistic is just something that practitioners need to have when they're dealing with people who are struggling with these types of challenges. And I don't really want to use mental illness, because I think that And I think the weaning method outlined is an example of where the person does have the capability to overcome it, rather than thinking, oh, this is like a mental health illness, I need to take medication. And I just think that, like the weaning method outlined, is a beautiful example of where that can be given and taught to Muslims, in terms of like being realistic, in the sense of, don't think about not watching pornography ever. Just think about, focus on the first 4 days. See how you do after those 4 days. I'm not going to ask you about the 5th day. Now we start again on the 6th day, and I'll say 6 days. I'm not going to ask you after the 7th day. I'm going to ask you again for 8 days. I'm not going to ask you, it's not my business. And that's, I think, just that approach, being realistic, being humane, is a more effective approach than astaghfirullah, that's haram. If you're a Muslim, you shouldn't be watching porn, because if I'm honest with you, and this is where, well, if any women are listening, they might be upset to hear this. This is where wives, mothers, female friends or relatives don't necessarily help. And this is some things when I've spoken to men who are struggling, and this is men of all ages, with porn, or whether it's going to escorts and things like that, is a lack of compassion from their female counterparts, whether it's, like I said, a mother, because a number of them can't imagine doing that. It's straight away, shit, how can you do this? And they know it's wrong. They're not asking for like sympathy, it's like, but they've got a problem. How do I come out of this? And I even test this when I post some things on my social media, where I get some message, I'll see some things from Reddit, and 95% of the response is very, like, for example, if a woman is saying that she caught her husband watching pornography or visiting escort, and the woman is saying that she still wants to stay with her husband, or she's struggling, how can she overcome this? 90% of the responses from the women will be like, divorce him, leave him. That's not what the woman's asking. She's saying, I know this is his problem. I feel that he's betrayed me. I know it's wrong. I'm hurt. How do I deal with this? And if the first reaction is leave him, Allah will give you someone better, this, that, and the other, that is not what she's asking for. Do you understand what I mean? I just think that sometimes people give advice that they themselves wouldn't take. And it's very easy to say, leave someone, this person's bad, this, that, and the other, without even realizing, who said that? Like, it's not so straightforward. Obviously, if someone's not in that situation, like I said, if you're giving advice to someone who's thinking about watching porn, thinking about going to an escort, that's very different. You can be very strict, but when someone's now involved in that, you have to be a bit more compassionate and understand. And again, another quick example I just think of with the Ibn Abbas, who was obviously a famous companion and very knowledgeable about the deen. He was sitting down giving a class with some students, and a man came to him and he said, is there any forgiveness from Allah for murder? And Ibn Abbas said to him, yes, there is. Allah, there is forgiveness, there is tawbah. And then later on, another man came up to him and he asked the same question, is there any forgiveness from Allah for murder? And then Ibn Abbas said, no, there isn't. And then the man went, okay. And then he went away. Then his companions, they asked him, they said, why is it, his students, sorry, they asked Ibn Abbas, they said, why is it the first man you said there is forgiveness, and then with the second man you said there isn't forgiveness? And they both asked the same question. And Ibn Abbas, he said, the first man that came, he saw remorse in his eyes because he's committed murder. So he wanted to let him know that, yes, Allah can still forgive you. You can make tawbah, you can repent. Then for the second man that came, he saw the anger that he was about to commit murder. So he said, no, there's no forgiveness available for someone who commits murder to prevent him from committing murder. So this is like an example of, again, someone not understanding the context, or just someone might read one part of that story instead of the second, not realizing that sometimes you might say something to prevent a worse harm. In the second case, and then the first case is that someone's already done something else. You can't tell them, don't you know that murder is haram? Don't you know that pornography is haram? They know that already. They're now stuck in this rut, shall we say. How do you help them come out of it? And I just think that's the type of advice and compassion that practitioners, teachers, counselors, whether it's self-development coaches, need to have when they're liaising with people. It's not just one clear answer. You need to understand the potential implications, where the person is at, and then you can advise them accordingly. But I just think that there's a wealth of treatments, methods available, not only from Muslims, but from non-Muslims as well, that we can incorporate, or if some things need to be changed to suit from an Islamic perspective, we should. Otherwise, we will just be given the same, black and white answers. This is halal, this is haram, and it's not really going to be, it's not really going to be effective for the person, and then they will feel there's no answers from the religion, when in reality there is plenty of answers from religion and guidance from religion, but it's the people haven't contextualized or put in a framework which is relevant for the modern day person.
So the next question here is more, I think, to do with married couples. She enjoys oral sex, and so do I, but I find it difficult because of the texture and the smell. I'm uncertain if this is normal for all women, or if there's a way to politely discuss or navigate around this conversation. Is it a hygiene issue? Is it a diet issue? Are there any practices we should incorporate before intercourse to avoid such things?
Okay, so it's definitely not the case for all women, because every woman has or most women have definitely have their own unique scent. So to say that if, for example, there's some women who their vagina smells or tastes a certain way, others, and again, there's, like I said, there's no people will make like inappropriate jokes, or you see memes where we're referring to like the vagina smells like fish. That's not the case for most women. If a woman does have a repugnant smell, that's fishy like, it could be a sign of bacterial vaginosis, BV. So that does happen for some women. So if it's like a really strong, unpleasant smell and it's been lasting for a period of time, then it's definitely recommended for the woman to see a gynecologist. That could be an issue. If it's, for example, a case of where he just doesn't like the smell, the same way some people have a unique scent in terms of their body odor, that's a different matter altogether. So the first, is it something which is actually a health issue? Like if it's a really strong stench, if it's something that maybe he just is not really, it doesn't really like the taste and the smell, that's something else. It might be unique to her, or it might be a case of he might have unrealistic expectations that he thinks that the vagina should smell like or should taste like strawberries, and it's no woman's vagina smells like strawberry. So again, that's why, which box does he fit into? Is it there is an actual issue? If it is, then it's recommended for her to go and see a gynecologist to get that checked out. If it's a case of that he has unrealistic expectations because she's just got an actual a scent that is not in line with his expectations, or he might just not, for every reason, like you said, enjoy her particular scent. Now, I do think it's important that, again, especially if it's not the third one where it's really a strong repugnant smell that's linked to health issues, you just have to be acquainted and get used to, okay, because I can't tell someone that you find someone's natural scent unpleasant. You have to just enjoy it. I can't tell them that. You have to be quite realistic. But at the same time, if that's a situation, there are certain things that you can do to improve the scent. Some women have reported that drinking and eating a lot of pineapples actually does help improve the smell and the taste. Some women as well, who not necessarily have a really medical condition, but so ultimately you are what you eat. And if you're eating a lot of certain food, especially that got a foul smell, that can also affect the taste of the vaginal fluid and that particular area. So it might be, what might be needed is a change of diet. What might be needed is, especially before he goes and performs cunnilingus, performs oral sex, she thoroughly cleans her vulva and vaginal area. Obviously, not putting anything in the vagina. She can clean outside, but only use water. But just make sure she cleans thoroughly, because there are some women who suffer from, especially if a woman hasn't been circumcised. There are some women who their clitoral glands. I think I shall. Let me show you. I wanted to show you actually. So you've got this vulval puppet that I usually use when I'm giving demonstrations, right? So this is obviously the clitoral glands, right? Which is people use commonly called the clitoris, and there's a clitoral hood or the prepuce. Now, some women, and again, obviously, this is of a woman who hasn't undergone any form of female genital cutting, circumcision, or FGM. Now, for a number of women, if they don't clean under the clitoral hood, they can develop a condition of smegma. So similarly how men, but most Muslim men are circumcised, if they don't clean under the foreskin, they can develop smegma, right? And it can be like oily, and it can also produce a strong and bad smell. So a number of women don't actually, when they're cleaning themselves, they don't actually clean under the clitoral hood. So that also might be a problem. And there was one study that was released a few years ago, an American study, which found that 23% of women who went to a sexual health clinic to complain about vaginal or vulval problems, 23% had this condition called clitoral phimosis, where they didn't clean under the clitoral hood. And what happens is when this smegma develops under here, it sticks to the clitoral hood. And when it sticks, even when the woman's aroused, because usually when the woman's aroused, naturally the clitoral hood will retract. So it's easy to stimulate. But if it's like really got a lot of smegma and oil and hasn't been cleaned properly, it will stick and it won't. And even when she's aroused, it can even become very uncomfortable. So that's also, and obviously, like I said, that can also result in some strong smells that's not really pleasant. So again, it could be like a simple hygiene issue of not really cleaning the vulval area properly, which she could do. Obviously, in terms of, like I mentioned, changing her lifestyle and diet to make it a bit more healthier. And there are some foods that she can take, like I mentioned, like pineapple juice is said to help. And there are some products, natural products like honey, that some people use over their wives and vulva during oral sex. And because he's tasting it as well, then naturally it's not really going to put him off, so to speak. So that's like some practical advice. But I definitely don't put the honey inside the woman's vagina. So if it's like a round area, or like some other products, or products from other food products like strawberries, or like anything that's sweet tasting like kiwi and stuff like that, that's what you can do. So while you're playing with her, so you're not going to find the smell so off-putting.
Yeah, it's important to address from both sides. Women might want to discuss feminine hygiene with a healthcare professional for personalized advice. But there's also the flip side, women who experience discomfort due to their partner's hygiene. Many women struggle to bring this up, but it's important. Some men might not realize how their body hair, especially chest hair or unkept pubic hair, can affect intimacy. The texture can be irritating, and neglecting genital hygiene can disrupt a woman's pH balance, potentially leading to infections. Studies even show that bacteria buildup can be a concern. So open communication is key. Let your partner know your preferences in a respectful way. It's about mutual comfort and a healthier relationship.
Again, it's just following on, similar to what I said about with women's genital care, similar with men. I think in terms of lifestyle changes, type of food that you eat, that can also affect the smell. But because obviously, generally with the man, it's more external than internal in terms of what's producing any foul smell. It's more, I think maybe that's why maybe more men put more emphasis on female genital care as opposed to men, because a lot of women also don't swallow a man's fluids. They wouldn't necessarily know what it tastes like. So it's really external, but still the same thing in the sense of, as men, we need to make sure we are keeping on top of our hygiene, like you mentioned, not only the genital area, but the chest area and the rest of the body. And one of the things I would say that maybe a number of women don't really do as much as maybe that what they can improve on is the communication, because there are some women, or there are quite a lot of women who maybe are put off by the man's genital or hygiene practices, but it's not vocalized. So the man, as far as he's concerned, is like, okay, I'm clean, I smell good, or I look good. She hasn't told me anything otherwise, maybe because she's been raised or conditioned to believe that intimacy is just the husband's right, and she's just there to pleasure him, so she doesn't feel that she can have a say. So he's none the wiser. And again, I think with a lot of these issues, it's communication, honestly. A lot of it is that if it's a case of the man is well aware that he doesn't smell great, but he doesn't care, that's a problem. But if it's a case of a woman where I often find where women will maybe complain to their girlfriends, or even sometimes like an imam or a sexual health professional, things like that, but not to the actual husband, now that's a problem. But again, I understand some of the reasons why women don't feel comfortable to open up to him, because they think that he's going to shut them down or things like that, and they just expect him to know. So that's something that I would say that, on a serious note, women have to vocalize and actually say what the issue is. And it could be a case where even like, it might be even something that you've eaten, like bad breath. Not everyone realizes it, because we don't always smell our breath. We don't always smell ourselves. And because it's a smell that you're used to, you're not necessarily aware of how bad you may be smelling or how off-putting. Did you understand what I mean? So again, I just think that this is where women need to be empowered to actually say, this is not good. I'm really not I'm uncomfortable. Obviously, maybe be careful with the words that you use, but at the same time, you need to kind of actually say it and vocalize it and not be afraid to offer suggestions, or, before you were smelling great, like not just say, oh, you smell really bad, because no one likes to really hear that. Before, I liked when you wore this aftershave, or when you did this. Now, what's going on? So then he realized, oh, okay, it's not really a problem with me. It's just a problem that she doesn't like now, whereas before we never had that issue. Do you understand what I'm getting at? But if, for example, a woman says this, like, you always smell bad, I'm never really like been intimate with you because you've got bad hygiene, this and the other, and they've been together for X amount of years, that can, men's ego is fragile, that can really affect it. So again, it's just a case of, even if it has been a problem for a number of years, but she hasn't had the courage to say it, I would just say, it's how you say it is just as important. Because again, it's very easy just to say, speak to him, vocalize, but don't expect him to be a mind reader or him to know. Because that's what, but like you said, in terms of the studies and stuff that talk about that it can affect with a woman's pH level, I've seen similar studies with that, so I would agree with that. But ultimately, like I said, a lot of it does come down to communication, because if a woman is not communicating, and likewise vice versa, generally the partner is, and the partner's none the wiser, they are not going to change. So again, you just need to empower yourself to kind of definitely vocalize. Again, whether you don't want to say it bluntly, you can maybe use hints or suggestions, but you definitely do need to put that forth to your partner.
Will you please walk me through some hygiene tips for men? What are your recommendations when it comes to intercourse?
Oh, so prior to intercourse is the first thing. So the same way when we bath, and obviously even part of especially after ghusl, look what you have to bathe thoroughly, to clean the scrotum area in particular. So the parts of the genitalia where parts of bacteria or dirt can naturally gather, you need to clean that a lot, especially obviously with a scrub. Obviously use a lot of water. If one is not circumcised, for the man, make sure you clean under the foreskin, because that's where you can develop smegma, like I spoke about earlier in relation to women. Then obviously you can lather yourself with soap and things like that. But a lot of water first and foremost. Armpits in particular, even with spraying. This is something that my wife kind of told me about, is that before I used to just spray like this, like aerosol spray, and she didn't know you have to spray like this for like a long period all over the body, and it has a very different, because it sticks to the body rather than just spraying literally under the armpits. Because if you're someone who you sweat quite frequently, you might feel psh, psh, and I'm done, not realizing that there's sweat that still can come outside on other parts of the body, and you would have and I didn't realize that as well. That's my point. So that's why, again, when I was speaking about communication and things, is that your wife might be able to guide you. So there might be some parts, or like maybe your nails are not as clean, and that gives her the, what do they call it nowadays, the ick, or that puts her off. So that's why, again, it's like, it might be your breath, and these are things that not necessarily you're aware of. So of course, everyone, I'm assuming, brushes their teeth, but especially before you're intimate, definitely clean your teeth thoroughly using miswak. And sometimes don't be afraid to check in. Like, oh, it's kind of frowsy, I need to, don't be afraid to check in. But I think what can happen is that when you're married, you live with each other, after a period of time, naturally you just become complacent. I think that's one of the things. When initially when someone is, dating, courting, however you want to call it, or maybe newly married, they're more on point because they're conscious. But when you're now married, it's like naturally you just think, I don't need to work for her anymore. So it's just like, I'm horny, I want to have sex, let's do it. But you're not thinking about how you look or how you smell. That's honestly that's one of the things. Whereas when you was, or if you was in the beginning stages, you probably will be more conscious of that. So again, it's really more of a mindset thing. And again, it can be quite difficult because we all do become complacent in our affairs. But if you're looking at your wife as kind of like you're still dating her, some respect, in the sense that you still need to impress her, then you'll always be the same way when you meet someone new, or when you have a new business deal or things like that. You're making sure you're putting on your best clothes, or you're smelling good. You just need to kind of maybe adopt a similar approach when you're having intimate relations, because I think we all know it. But again, one of the dangers against complacency is to kind of like, you kind of forget that your wife, although she's your wife, she's still a separate human being who's also repulsed by certain things that you might not be repulsed to, because naturally, like our own sense is not as repulsive to someone else. Our own body odor is not as repulsive to someone else. But we need to be cognizant of that. And again, if our wife is not always going to vocalize that, just maybe again, like with habit checking your breath, some parts of the body that you're not spelling correct with, then obviously by all means, like, do what you need to do. Do you have anything to add? Because obviously you're well versed in the fitness and I'm assuming the hygiene realm. Do you have anything to add on that?
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. I think this entire conversation is subjective. What bothers one wife might not bother another. That's why open communication is key. It's a touchy subject, so pick your words carefully. Maybe set a time to talk when you have both studied each other's moods a bit. Be sensitive about your partner's feelings and navigate the conversation carefully. It can be subjective depending on the person. Learn how your partner receives information. Maybe a lighthearted joke like, wow, that cologne is strong, instead of saying that perfume is disgusting, can get the message across without offense. The key is open communication, obviously. Don't be shy bringing up your standards for hygiene. But remember, it goes both ways. Weight gain or changes in grooming habits can be an issue too. Be intentional about maintaining healthy habits for yourself and your partner, like the ones you had when you first got married. These conversations can help couples become more educated on common hygiene issues that affect intimacy. The more you know, the easier it is to navigate around these topics around maintaining a healthier relationship.
I love what you said about the intentional part. I think that to be intentional, I think that's very important, because I do think that many people are very much, both men and women alike, are very intentional in terms of getting married, but they're not very intentional in terms of staying married or having a healthy marriage and wanting to please their partner or impress their partner. And now, if that's your mindset, then you would be conscious of a lot of these things. But I think a lot of people, unfortunately, it's to get married, and then automatically you just naturally, the work stops, not realizing that. And then the work maybe goes to business for the men, friends. They want to still keep up with the Joneses with their friends, with business and things like that. They still want to succeed and impress those people. But and women, it might be with their friends and things like that. But in terms of as an individual, there's so many people, so many married couples who are just together because of the sake of their children. But in terms of, is there any real friendship, love between the two of them? It's quite this sad, because even, so was it 2 weeks ago, I even was told a friend of a friend is going through a divorce, and she was told, so I think she was with her husband for maybe like about 12 years, got one child, but he just like really let himself go after the marriage, and he just didn't even think, and like wasn't even working and didn't want to work. There's one thing, you're not working, but it's like not even having the effort. So she was literally providing and doing everything, and after a while, resentment actually built, and she was like, I'm raising 2 children.
Well,
and then at the last, when she was like, I really want out, that's when he was like panicking and was reaching out to different people to try and see, can someone speak to my wife on behalf, not realizing that a lot of the damage has been done. And again, one of the sad things is when, I think she was on her last straw, and I think when he did eventually divorce, she, or just before this, she's about to divorce, she asked some of her relatives, and she's Muslim, practicing and things like that, and they were like, no, you can't divorce, don't divorce. He said, and then she was like, I don't love it. And her friends were saying to her, no one loves their husbands. And to me, that was, and she heard this about 3 or 4 different women. Like, it's not about love. It's not about love. It's just, he's a good father, compatibility. It's not about love. And to me, that's sad, because that's not what our religion teaches again. So even if that might be common amongst a number of Muslims, even practicing Muslims, that's not what the religion teaches. This idea that there shouldn't be any love between the husband and wife. I'm not talking about love because it's the mother of my child or because the father of my child. No, between the two, friendship, companionship. Because a lot of people have not actually seen that, they think that's the norm. That's what an Islamic marriage is. So you hear people will talk about like a Western marriage or Western relationship, but Muslim and that's a problem. So again, I just think one needs to be intentional to love or to want to love their wife and to want to receive the love, vice versa. And that involves wanting to impress her, wanting to be pleased with her. And I just think it's that mindset shift that definitely needs to change, because rather than seeing your wife as just someone who is the mother of your child and you love her because she's raising your child, you love her for who she is as a woman. Are you in love with her? And if that was the case, but it's not anymore, then you need to try and rekindle that to get that to be the case. But that's all a case of, that's what a lot of that is in the mind and how you feel about that person. But if you look at that person and she's just there really to raise my children and to look after my kids, but in terms of the relationship that we have, I'm not interested in that. I'm more interested in the relationship I have with my friends and business. Then a lot of men won't be intentional in trying to get the hygiene game or their health game up, because for them it's like, I'm good with how I am. I'm not interested with, I have a partner. So yeah, but definitely conversations like this, I definitely think needs to be had. So people have a different perspective in terms of what it means to want to get married and be married as a Muslim. But I just think, unfortunately, we've just adopted this idea that marriage is really just for procreation and that's it, not really having a loving and healthy relationship between the husband and the wife.
So on to another issue, a question from men. I feel emasculated because she lasts longer than me in bed. Are there any physical or diet practices you can recommend to avoid premature ejaculation and have firmer erections during intercourse?
Yeah, sure. So there are a couple of practices. One can do Kegel exercises, which not only helps to improve the pelvic floor muscles, but it's known to help increase or delay ejaculation, so it can improve stamina. I definitely obviously would recommend kunyaza. Kunyaza is a non-penetrative sexual technique, which a man uses his penis to stimulate the clitoris and labia minora, so the woman's lips. And the wonderful thing, some of the benefits of kunyaza, it can help prolong bedroom play, because you're not focused on thrusting and penetration, because most men on average last about 5.5 minutes by penetration, whereas women on average last about 14 minutes, if just by penetrative sex. So most women do actually last longer than men, but like we mentioned before, that most women orgasm far easier without penetration. So if, for example, where the like you mentioned, the man has his wife is lasting longer than himself, like I said, he can perform Kegel exercises, he can perform kunyaza method, he can also perform the start and stop method. And that's basically when you're thrusting, so when you're obviously having sex, then you pull out just before you hit the point of no return. So the point of no return is known as when you're just about to orgasm, when you're just about to ejaculate. So when you pull out just before, as in you stop thrusting, and then you let the orgasmic feeling subside, you let it go away, and then you start continuing to thrust again. Now that's a method that helps men prolong bedroom performance, but you need to have conversations with your wife, because some women can feel frustrated that as obviously you're thrusting, all of a sudden you're pulling out, and that's because he's at the point where he can no longer control himself because he's going to ejaculate. So the start and stop method is one method which many sex experts advise. There's also the squeeze method, which is similar to start and stop method, and that's where just before you're about to orgasm or ejaculate, you hold the tip of your penis, because that is where it's the most sensitive, and that's where obviously all of the nerves endings are. So if you hold the tip of the penis, again, that also helps the feeling of orgasm or ejaculation subside, and then you can continue again. Now, because obviously it can be quite difficult for the woman, because she's enjoying obviously the intercourse, and if you're going to pull out and stop, she might feel, okay, she's going to lose some sensation because you're not stimulating anymore. So whilst you pull out, you could also maybe use one of your hands to also stimulate her. So you continually to stimulate maybe her external clitoris, but with your other hand, maybe you're holding the tip of your penis with the squeeze method to the feeling subsides. The fifth method I'll mention is also edging as well. Edging is a technique or it's a practice where you help your partner get to almost to the point of ejaculation, and then you let the feeling subside. So you bring her to the brink, and you need to have a lot of ejaculatory control, but that's probably the most challenging of the techniques to do. But for his own performance, in terms of if he wants to, the natural methods or techniques he can do is Kegel exercises, which we mentioned, the Kunyaza technique, the start and stop method, and also the squeeze method. And then if he wants to, he can try edging. But he shouldn't be too disheartened that a woman lasts longer than him, because like I said, most women require sufficiently more time to orgasm via intercourse compared to men. So I wouldn't beat himself too much about that. If he's climaxing within like 30 seconds or less than a minute, he may have premature ejaculation. But again, that's more of, it's really a concern if it's bothering the person at hand, and if it lasts for maybe 6 months or longer. But most men will suffer some form of premature ejaculation. It's completely normal, so I wouldn't get distressed by that. And ultimately, if he is climaxing quicker than he would like, or climaxing quicker than his wife, he could also perform oral sex and go down on her, or he can use his fingers and do manual stimulation, or maybe if he wants to use sex toys. So even though he might climax quicker than her, there's other things he can do in order to help ensure that she is sexually satisfied.
So basically what you're saying is the goal isn't longevity in bed, but more of satisfaction on both ends.
Correct. Yeah, correct. The goal is pleasure. The goal should be mutual pleasure. And that's something which many of our early scholars spoke about. And they actually encourage couples to experience a simultaneous orgasm or a shared climax. But that needs, and I do touch on this in one of my books, but that requires a lot of, not only conversation between the two, but you need to know each other's partners and their responses. But a lot of men, because we view performance or how good you are in the bedroom by how long you last, that's not necessarily fair, because like I said, on average, men don't last more than 5 minutes. And I'll just put it to men like this. If you were to, it's like comparing a sprinter with a long distance runner. So you've got someone like a Usain Bolt and like a Mo Farah. They're both exceptional athletes in their field, but very different. One over 100 meters or 200 meters is explosive, but then after the 200 meters, he's exhausted. He can't do anything anymore. Then the other one, he can literally run for an hour or two, but it's not at the same pace. But if you've got a man who is like a sprinter, which most men are in terms of the way we view sexuality, and women are like long distance runners, they can't really compete with each other unless they understand what works for the other. So that's why, again, it's about understanding your partner. But ultimately, if your goal of a sexual encounter is sexual pleasure, then the man, the sprinter in this case, he can delay being a sprinter, and instead of being a 100-meter sprinter, he can be a 400-meter runner or 800-meter runner. So he's not been explosive. He's not exerted all of his energy. And likewise, the long distance runner, because the long distance runner wants to come together, shall I say, for lack of a better term, with the sprinter, rather than pacing themselves, they will run a bit faster. So rather than running 1,500 meters or even longer, they'll run faster so they can do maybe 800 or 400 so they're in line with the sprinter. So again, it's about communication and having an understanding and having proper knowledge and education, because like I said, people view sex, sometimes it comes from the man or the woman, that the longer you last in the bedroom, that's how better you are, and that's not necessarily the case. The goal should be mutual pleasure, and it should be sexual satisfaction, and understanding that there's various ways of achieving that for both yourself and your wife.
So let's talk about going multiple rounds. It's true that women can often have a higher capacity for sustained arousal than men. This can lead to frustration in some couples. While open communication is key, there are also ways for men to potentially improve their stamina. So based on my research, I know one approach is natural, post-orgasm smoothie with protein powder and bananas. Studies suggest that a combination of this can help with recovery. Another key practice is Kegel exercises to strengthen the pelvic floor muscles. This can lead to better control and potentially longer endurance. So are stereotypes about male stamina entirely true? Not necessarily. With healthy practices and open communication, I believe couples can find ways to navigate intimacy that leave everyone satisfied. But yeah, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so just by way of definition, when we're referring to multiple rounds, I'm assuming you're referring to after ejaculation, whether you can have another ejaculation, have another erection to ejaculate. So yeah, that's generally referred to like, I mean, women are blessed as in that most women are multi-orgasmic, and they can, like you mentioned, have multiple rounds. Whereas most men, after we have an ejaculation,
we have a refractory period. So after you orgasm, you have a refractory period where, and again, it varies from man to man, but as you get older, the refractory period is longer. So generally, when a man is relatively young, when he's in his teens, in his 20s, generally the refractory period is quite short, meaning he can climax and ejaculate, and then he's good to go to have another round, sometimes within a couple of minutes, sometimes within 10 minutes. But some men, as they get older, the refractory period is stretches and becomes longer. So he might need 45 minutes, even like you mentioned, another day. So he can only literally do one round. So obviously that can be quite difficult where the woman is ready to go again, or the man is already released and she hasn't even been pleasured. And like you mentioned, there are some proteins and things that, because a lot of it does come down to diet as well and lifestyle. So it's not also just genetics. Some of it is due to genetics and aging, but also it's due to lifestyle as well. So lifestyle is definitely, if he's improving his diet and his food intake and not really consuming so much fatty foods and processed foods, that can also help. And then there's also some practices, so like in the Taoism tradition, there's a really good book called The Multi-Orgasmic Man, where they teach and train men how to become multi-orgasmic. And a lot of it, he talks about semen retention and things like that. And if you are a man that, for example, because there's some men that they can only do maybe 1 or 2 rounds. Now, if you know, again, you have to know your body. If you know that's the case, then rather than releasing, because you know that's all you've got, then maybe do one of the practices I mentioned earlier, the start and stop method or the kunyaza, or to delay ejaculation, then you can go again. Because yeah, with a lot, it's not really, I think a lot of people where they get troubled by this, it's not that they necessarily want to go 4 or 5 rounds. It's that after they've released their load, shall we say, they're not able to go again. So you can only literally last for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Some people, even like you said, if they maybe take some protein shakes or things like that, they might be able to go another round. But what if they can only do 2 rounds and they release within 5 minutes? So at the moment, at the most, they can only last 10 minutes. So it's not necessarily the rounds that's a problem. It's just that it doesn't last long enough for her liking. So that's why, again, it's about knowing your body. And if again, so that's why for me, I wouldn't put so much emphasis on how many rounds you do, because we live in a world nowadays where people think about good sex as being how long you last and how many rounds you go. When in reality, it should be about, like I said, about mutual pleasure and how do you get to that optimal pleasure for yourself and your wife. So yeah, I would, like I said, you can look in terms of some different protein shakes. I don't know any specifically that's proven that will definitely make you last longer. There are some that will definitely improve your ability to delay your ejaculation, but in terms of making sure you last longer, things like that, um, I don't know any actually proven ones. I've heard a couple, but I'm more on the case of helping men delay the ejaculation, or advise men to delay the ejaculation, whether it's by way of some of the techniques we mentioned, or even practicing semen retention, which we spoke about previously. So again, I just think it's about men understanding their body as well as their partners, and not to be too hung up on having performative sex or to try and compete with their wife. Because the thing is as well, and this is what people need to realize, is that not the same way like we don't put pressure on women to, well, in most cases, ejaculate, although women can ejaculate in orgasm. When you ejaculate, it does take a lot out of you. That's why it depletes a lot of men, and we lack a lot of energy. That's why we can't go again. When women orgasm, because a lot of women don't orgasm with ejaculation, they are able to go again. So it's a different experience. Whereas if you're able, because some men can orgasm without ejaculating, if you can orgasm, a lot of men can orgasm again and again and again. But it's when they ejaculate, that's what like basically like depletes them. So that's why they need to. A lot of it is down to controlling your controlling your ejaculation and developing strong again by way of developing your PC muscles and strengthening that, being more healthy with your lifestyle, and obviously improving your cardiovascular system, or whatever it's called, where the blood is at. Because that's a lot of it is down to health. But at the same time, like I said, I wouldn't put too much pressure on yourself, especially if back in the day or when you was younger, you could last X amount of time. Now you're struggling. Find other practices in the bedroom that you can incorporate to help you satisfy your wife, and also she can be satisfied with you.
Now, onto a topic that isn't still commonly discussed. Let's talk about the way the male and female brain are wired when it comes to intimacy. So would you say we treat it differently? So to add a bit more context to that, a friend of mine recently shared a fascinating story about his relationship. He felt a rut forming. Things were stale, and intimacy lacked a spark. Craving something different, he hatched a plan, a surprise vacation. So imagine a picture-perfect beachfront getaway, serene, beautiful. He described it as one of the best experiences he shared with her, and she echoed the sentiment. However, upon returning, something unexpected happened. He probed further as to how much the trip meant to her, expecting her to gush out about the exotic location. But here's the twist. Her strongest takeaway wasn't the scenery. It was the entire experience, being intimate with him. But not because of the location itself. She revealed that what truly touched her was his commitment to following through. So here's the key. He made a promise, a spontaneous plan of a vacation, and despite her initial skepticism, him being a busy man, this will probably get cancelled, she thought. But he pulled it off. He prioritized her, putting her needs first throughout the entire journey, from handling the luggage and booking the hotel. He made it effortless for her. That's the moment her perspective shifted. She saw him in a completely new light, a different man entirely, and feeling pampered and cherished, she witnessed the ideal figure, the man she longed for. It wasn't the vacation itself, but seeing him embody that ideal that sparked her her attraction. This revelation struck a chord. I think we men tend to prioritize physical intimacy, while women, it's so much more. It's a realization that highlights the stark difference between the male and female brain when it comes to processing intimacy. A reminder that the path of a woman's heart isn't paved solely in physical appearance, but the journey itself. What's your take on that?
Yes, I would agree that men and women, generally speaking, view sex and intimacy very different. It's not that one is better than the other. It's just that Allah has created us differently. And whilst men are quite linear and fairly, you could say, straightforward, I think women are more unique and complex in a beautiful way. And it varies from not only from woman to woman, but also varies from woman at different stages in her life. So what might have attracted or turned a particular woman on when she was in her early 20s is going to be very different when she's in her mid 30s with two children. And that's something I think as men we fail to realize. Whereas generally speaking, you ask a man at 16 years of age, 25 years of age, and 45 years of age, it's quite consistent in terms of what they find attractive in a woman and what turns them on. So that's where I think there needs to be a level of appreciation and understanding that, like I said, women's um, mindset and the way they view intimacy is different. And not only from woman to woman, but even the same woman, because it can change over a period of time. And that's where I think men can find that quite frustrating because they might have thought, this is what you liked before, whereas now what I did before is not working. So that's why it does require an effort from men to understand what attracts or what turns their woman on. And it's something that many psychologists have spoken about, and like in terms of trying to uncover and unravel the secrets of women's sexuality. And a famous psychologist, Esther Perel, and also Marta Mendez, she mentioned that the secret of female desire is that it is narcissistic, she said. And what they meant by this, that the secret of female desire is that it's narcissistic, is that in order for a woman to really want to be intimate with someone, want to be intimate with a man, she needs to love herself. And in order to love herself, she needs to be comfortable with herself. So with a lot of women, the secret to intimacy and sexuality, it starts in their mind and how she not only feels about herself, the connection she has with her husband, the surroundings. So there's a lot of things. If one of those things are not in sync, all of a sudden she's not interested. And a woman could be going through something in a stage in life where she might feel that she's not listened to by her partner. So that's the most important thing. Or he doesn't he doesn't complete what he said he's going to do. So he might promise her or say he's going to do something and he doesn't do it for whatever reason. So she no longer feels she's the priority. So the moment that he starts doing things, and it might be small things, but arranges, like you said, like to go away, and he takes care of everything, where she feels that he's totally in control. All of a sudden, she sees him in a new light and is aroused by him. And for men, that can be quite difficult to comprehend because, again, we're generally quite visual, whereas women are generally more emotional and seek connection. So it's important to understand that. So the fact that a lot of women, in order to be physically aroused, they need to be mentally aroused and emotionally aroused. That depends on whatever they're going through in their state of mind. So that's why what you said is not surprising at all. But it's just that I think oftentimes we as men, we view female sexuality and think it should be the way we view sex and intimacy. And that's not the case. So it's about understanding like I said, women are different, and also that same particular woman, what turns on can change over a period of time. So, and also another thing that a number of psychologists have mentioned is that in terms of one of the differences between how our brain processes sexuality compared to the female brain is that male male sexual desire is quite responsive. Sorry, male sexual desire is quite spontaneous, whereas women's sexual desire is quite responsive. And what they mean by that is that we're quite spontaneous, as in you can see an attractive woman and you're ready to go, literally from 0 to 100, relatively very quickly. You're ready to engage in intimate relations. Whereas with women, most women are considered to have responsive desire as opposed to spontaneous, as in it's not just seeing an attractive partner, their husband, that will it might be for them to even engage in intimate relations. They're not necessarily full-blown intercourse. It might be cuddling, kissing, non-genital touching, non-sexual touching, or even emotional things that they see that they feel connected to their partner. It might be even helping with the laundry. That might make them feel special and aroused. Now they're ready to continue intimate relations. So again, it's just about understanding not only the woman's body, but also the woman's mind, and knowing that it changes over a period of time. And this isn't something which we as Muslims should be surprised or ashamed by, because when we look at the Quran and the story of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, and he was seduced by Zuleika. She's not mentioned by name, Zuleika, who wanted to have intimate relations with Yusuf. We have to remember that Yusuf was an attractive man. He was like a very handsome man. She was a married woman. She was a woman she was also known to be very beautiful. But some of the scholars mentioned in the commentary of the Quran that her husband wasn't attending to her needs. Her husband was neglecting her. And that's why then she felt desirous of Yusuf alayhi salam, not just because he was very handsome, but because of his manners and the way he conducts himself. So this is something that now some people have been threatened by this and felt like, oh, that's why we need to lock women away. And that's not the point. What scholars are mentioning is that women have needs the same way men have needs, but it's in order for, as husbands, one of the learning lessons from this particular story is to learn to understand your woman and how to please her, and how to meet her needs, because it's not always just about physical. It might be attention, giving her emotional attention, connect with her on a deeper level that's more than physical. So I just think that as men, whilst it can be quite frustrating, because you might have thought, okay, you're my wife now, I'm providing for you financially. What's the problem? We might not be providing emotionally, and that's one of the big points that a lot of women talk about: the importance of emotional intelligence, having that connection that as men naturally think we kind of struggle with. But that's something that we need to kind of be more intentional in understanding. Okay, if this is what turns you on, great, then I'm going to make sure that is a priority. There's not necessarily of knowing this is definitely going to work, but understanding what turns her on, what she finds more important for their relationship, for their marriage, and then you prioritize that. So that's the thing that, like I said, because it can change not only from woman to woman, but even within the same person over a period of time, a woman might find one thing to be very arousing, and another time it might be something totally different. So that's why, again, there definitely needs to be a lot more effort on our side to try and understand that women, yes, they view sexuality and intimacy different. Then the onus is on us to understand that and try and meet her needs.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you. And again, it goes back to effective communication, being very intentional about understanding your partner's needs, because again, it's a subjective topic. It varies between couples. So, anyway, this leads me to, well, I'll say my final question. How do I continuously evolve as a man, making sure my wife sees me in that light, or in a way that doesn't come at the cost of my mental health? What discussions do I need to have with her, and what practices should I start as a man that is looking forward to getting married and one that's trying to fix his marriage?
Okay, that's a deep question. I think even if someone is not married, one should behave as if they're married. And what I mean by that is looking after yourself. So just because you're not married, it doesn't mean you shouldn't look after yourself from a fitness perspective, from a health perspective, from a grooming perspective, from being responsible, from being someone who follows through. Because these are all of the things that you're going to need to have a healthy, successful long-term marriage. So it's all of these things you can practice without even being married. So to be in that, so the same way I think a number of men that will say, I want a woman that is a wife, that's a wife even before I meet her, like behaves like a wife. So we would judge women in terms of how they behave and thinking, okay, if she behaves a certain way, she's not a wife, that wife material. The same as for husbands, for men as well. You can behave as a husband even if you're not, so even if you're not married yet. So all of those things, like I mentioned about grooming, health wise, being in, looking after yourself, practicing discipline. These are all things that you need in order to maintain a healthy long term marriage. Likewise, education. Don't be afraid of learning, because the same way we've touched on this a couple of times, how women change over a period of time, you're always going to need to be understanding that the woman that you're going to be with, at when she's 25 or whatever age, when you get married, she's going to be very different, maybe a completely different woman at 35, 45. But if the love is there, you're always going to have that willingness to kind of still learn how to impress her, how to please her. But if you're become stagnant and think, no, I've got my prize, shall I say, I'm going to rest on my laurels, I'm going to be content, you're going to lose her. You might not lose her physically, but you lose her emotionally. So that's why, again, to be someone who's always eager to learn, and that's something that should be part of your characteristics, part of your trait, not just to easy, you just want to make more money. Because I think as men, we put so much emphasis on us being financial providers, but we don't put much emphasis on being on us being emotional providers. And that's something very different, because again, you need to have a level of vulnerability to do that. And the best of examples is the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So if you're looking at his life and looking how he was with his wives, then also that's the obviously the bar that none of us can reach, but we can aspire to that form of greatness. So having that as obviously as the romantic role model is definitely important, even if you're not married, because that's something you can aspire to and obviously constantly learning about. And then also understanding about female psychology. Don't be afraid to read books by women or listen to women, in terms of women who are married or being married or in long-term relationship, in terms of understanding what went well and what didn't go well. Because like I said, everyone's going to have their own different perspectives, and you can learn from that when you do get married. And understanding that one of the things that a number of not only experts but women talk about is that one of the things that a lot of women need is, or even relationships need to become, to maintain the spark, shall we say, is of a form of some space, or what people call erotic space. As in, yes, of course, you can obviously be in the same household and living with each other, but you're two separate human beings and you have your separate lives. So you don't want to become like, just roommates or brother and sister, where you need to have a bit of distance. And also, when there's a bit of distance, like novelty, it sparks the erotic desire and erotic passion, especially in women. Because as men, like I said, we can become quite complacent. But if you're having, and I'm not saying a separate life, a separate family. No, I'm just saying you've got your own interests, you've got your own things that you're doing outside. And likewise, she should have her own interests and things outside of you. So when you do come together, there's new conversations that you can have, new experiences. She's not just living her life through you, and you're not just living your life through her. So I think it's important that you maintain, even though, and this can happen obviously, like if you're interested, and this happens often, even unfortunately for some women, is that either they're just waiting until they get married and they have this misunderstanding that marriage completes them. And it doesn't, like, or they'll use a hadith that you've completed half of your deen. And that doesn't mean that you're insufficient when you're married, and when you're not married, it doesn't mean that. But people have this idea that, or they get married and then all of their other interests outside of and prior to marriage ends. All of their interest becomes their other half, or especially like pleasing their husband. Now that can work for a certain period of time, but after a while, resentment can build, because you're two separate human beings and you want to have something new that you're talking about, or that that you're interested. You don't need to, you want to know, you want to learn something new about your partner, not necessarily each and every day, but over a period of time. So I definitely think that it's important that you develop your own individual personalities even during the marriage. And obviously you can have that even prior to the marriage by having other interests apart from just being obsessed with marriage. Because unfortunately some women, before they do get married, they're just obsessed with marriage. Like, once I get married, that's it, khalas, and my life is going to be complete. And it's like, okay, now that you're married, what next? You need to have some interest outside of your husband, which I think is very important. And again, like I said, about being on a continuous journey to learn, having a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yourself, because I think I've seen and I've heard of many women who, again, they just feel that just pleasing their husband is their ticket to Jannah. You also need to have a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where some women, I've heard of that, will just think that being a submissive wife is good, even if they don't pray. And I just never understood where that comes from, because that's not from our deen. Yes, there's encouragement from women to be obedient to their husband, but in no way as a woman has an excuse where she doesn't have to pray and have a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is obviously prior to marriage. So just this idea of thinking, okay, I'm just going to be religious when I'm married, I think that can be quite dangerous. You want to have develop a relationship and a connection with Allah prior to marriage. So obviously that will help when you sustain your marriage, inshallah. So there's some of the things that off the top of my head that I would think about. But just again, like I said, be very open-minded as well, and know that as you grow and you get older, your certain things may change in terms of the way you view your relationship, intimacy. But if you have got that connection or that love or the desire to please your other half, even when they change or you change, you're still going to be committed to wanting to please them.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of women here, and there's a common thread. A man with a purpose is incredibly attractive. It's not about the money, but more having a driving force, something that makes you get up each day. Like, look at you, for instance. Your work here is a purpose. You're helping people in Islam and serving the Ummah. So it's a beautiful concept. I'll say it's a shame that a lot of young men see Islam as rigid. I remember I used to be like that too. Social media has way more of an influence on our generation than religion does, unfortunately. But I think it's important that no matter how far you believe you have strayed away from your religion, or if you feel like you're not on your deen, there's always a chance of redemption. That's the beautiful thing about Islam. Allah is the most forgiving. Even if you do feel ashamed, and because I know a lot, I also shared that mentality once upon a time where I felt that, oh, I've strayed so much away from the religion, I feel ashamed to even turn back to God and pray. I remember a mentor of mine was telling me that no matter how much you feel like you've strayed away from the religion, never stop praying. Don't feel ashamed to pray. Don't feel ashamed because you feel like you're going to continue on a certain path. Still pray. It's really important, because that's the beautiful thing about Islam is, God is most forgiving. He's all-knowing, all-wise. He knows what is best for you. So don't think you're not worthy of redemption, So I think that is one. And also the aspect of, I believe any woman would want a man on his deen. Any woman would want a man to pass that down to the next generation, to their kids, that every action he makes is through that of the teaching of the Prophet and that in the Quran by Allah. So I think that's also really important. But yeah, the whole aspect of continuous learning, as you mentioned, is very crucial, especially when it comes to intimacy. Many men underestimate the importance of understanding their partner's needs. So that sexual education is a big part of that. Being a well-rounded man goes beyond just the physical. But other than that, I think you've pretty much hit the nail on the head. Purpose, faith, and commitment to learning, including sexual well-being, all contribute to what a woman would truly find attractive. It's more than just the looks. It's like being a man who is continuously and constantly growing. Anything you want to add on that?
I think that's very important. I just want to buttress that point. I didn't mention that, but I'm glad you did, because I do believe that, and again, this can come. I was trying to explain what I mean by this. That especially if you're not married, marriage or no woman should be your goal. As in, you should have a purpose outside of any woman, and then inshallah the women will come. But if you've got a purpose that's greater than marriage and your woman, women ultimately are followers. They'll follow you, and your goal has to be bigger than even her and your family. So I just think that definitely as men, and again, the way this is communicated, I think some people do not understand it properly, where they think that the woman isn't important. It's not that. It's just that if a woman sees, and women are generally attracted to men who are leaders, who are going somewhere, and then they want to follow them and they want to join them. But if your goal is just to get this particular woman, or just, it's like, okay, now you've got her, then what? Where are you leading her to? But you haven't got a goal, and then you're thinking she's going to help you or tell you what the goal is. Whereas if you're on a journey and you've got a goal, and if you are essentially like a man of God, and obviously your goal is ultimately to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's the primary goal. Then you've got sub goals within that, whether it's helping the ummah, these type of things that's connected to your ultimate goal. She's joining you. So no matter what, so that's your ultimate goal. Everything else is secondary. So whatever happens in life, on the way you can deal with that, because that is the greatest goal. Whereas if your goal is just to be a million, or not to be a millionaire, once you've got it, then what?
Yeah.
Or to own this particular. So that's why I just think, even for the young people, maybe it's the way Islam has been taught. That's why they feel they they don't really connect with it. And that's happened to me when I was quite young as well. But I just think when, and this is why it's good if you're open to learning and reading, when you hear about, again, about the Prophet and the other prophets and the great people that the Quran speaks about, these were men who had goals greater than anything, and they're inspiring because of what they went through. And then when you read about it and how it's explained and contextualized, then you aspire to be like that. But if, for example, you're just thinking of religion as just being, you're just very serious looking, never smiling, just going to the mosque, everything's quite, seems boring. You're not moving, you're not progressing, you're not even progressing in terms of the dunya, because you could also progress in the dunya as well. It's not to say that if you become a man of God, you don't have any money, you don't wear nice clothes. That's not the case. But because we don't maybe see too many of those models or those examples, we have a perverted understanding of religion. That's the problem. It's not the religion itself, it's our misunderstanding that we have. So I just think to have that clear understanding in terms of what it means to be a man who's a leader first and foremost of his family, and you might be a leader of one man, two men, multiple men, and then ultimately, first and foremost, you're obviously a servant of Allah. That is very attractive for a good woman. That's attractive for a good woman. Some women might not like that, but again, I'm talking about for good women, hopefully, righteous women, and that's something that obviously someone that you would also be attracted to. But if you're not on that path, maybe the women that you are attracted to are not good women because you're not a good man. And that's something that as men sometimes there's a lot of like blaming the women and this and that, but the women that you are attracted to is because you are not a good man. So the Allah mentions good men are for good women, or pure men are for pure women, and pure women are for pure men, and vice versa. So this again, if you're on that path, there's certain things that you might have been attracted to before that you wasn't when you was on the path that now you are attracted to. So but a lot of the work does have to, I think, I place more emphasis on men because I think we are leaders, or we should be the leaders, and we should be leading by example, and then the women will follow. And just the last point, I know we spoke a lot about, you know, sexual satisfaction and sexual education. Forgot to mention importance of understanding the difference between sex, love, and intimacy, and they're not always the same. We often use the term interchangeably, as in when you have, if you, because there's many people who are married but they're not in love. There are many people who are having sex but they're not married. But we use the terms interchangeably. Now, in an ideal world, you should be married, you should be in love, and you should be having pleasurable sex. But the reality is, not everyone is having that. But obviously, you want to have all of that in your marriage. Now, so if we start obviously from the foremost with, okay, you're married, but you want to have love for your wife, not because she's the mother of your child, not just because she's a good Muslim. You want to love her. So you need to get to know her and appreciate her. And then obviously in terms of the sexual part, in terms of to have good sex for both you and her, you need to understand the difference between sex and sexual pleasure and intimacy. Because you can have an orgasm, you can have sex, like the sexual act, you can have children, but there may not be no emotional intimacy, there may not be no real connection. So it's important to understand obviously all of these different things to ensure that you have a pleasurable, healthy sexual relationship in your marriage.
Yeah, another important thing I've noticed in married couples is the aspect of financial literacy. But yeah, what's your take on that?
No, that's very important. And this is something which it might be controversial to say, but I'll say anyway. If, for example, you're at a stage of your life, especially for men who are relatively young, and they've obviously got that burning desire to obviously get married, but financially they're not where they want to be or where they think they should be. I would advise a number of men to maybe delay marriage, because you can get married, don't get me wrong, but when you're married and and for your lack of a better term, broke. I'm not saying if you haven't got money, you shouldn't get married, but if you're broke, probably the choice of women you can get married to is going to be fairly limited. That's one thing. And may not necessarily be the type of woman you want to get married to. And then once you're married, now you're struggling in terms of how to provide, not only for your wife, but also to find your purpose. So there's a lot of challenges that many men have when they get married, when they can't afford it and they're not in a position where financially where they're comfortable. Whereas if they were to delay it, like delay getting married until they are they've got themselves in a decent position to where they can provide for their wife and hopefully their family, then they're in a better position to be the man and the leader. So that's something that sometimes, you need to think with your big head instead of your little head. And sometimes
Mm.
delaying marriage can be the best thing for all parties. But sometimes I think the message that people get is because they've got this strong desire, they just think, I need to get married in whatever pennies that they've got or whatever naira that they've got. They'll pull that together and say, okay, I can afford this little shack. Now we're married, but they're really struggling. And many, marriages fail because of that. So yeah, the point of financial literacy, then we can talk about, because that's something that, because onus is on the man from an Islamic perspective. That's also,
Mm.
so that's why as much as, you can be, just say 21, 22, you don't really have much money. There's a girl that maybe you're seeing and she wants to get married, but yeah, she wants to get married, but the burden of the finances is on you. So she would say that and let her say that, but it's on you. So if you don't think you're equipped or people are advising you don't think you're really ready for that, you
Mm.
might have to delay that. And that's where again the financial aspect I think is definitely very important. But sorry, please continue because you wanted to talk about financial literacy. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, yeah. On financial literacy, I think it's great to be smart with money, but there's another side to it. I see a lot of men tend to overlook the aspect of being educated in different sectors of the economy. You don't need to be an expert in everything, but having a basic understanding is attractive. So imagine your partner wanting to explore a new career path. Wouldn't it be great if you could be, good resource to her, a great resource to her, guiding her, not just saying, "Oh, I don't know anything about that." Um, and this goes beyond your partner. You want to be a guide for your children as well. They might have interests that you don't share, but by having a broad knowledge base, you can lay the groundwork. I have a story about a friend of mine, and we were on a group outing with a couple of female friends of mine, and he's like a walking encyclopedia. He's well versed in different areas of life. And during that entire time, like, their attention was drawn to him the most. And he wasn't even trying to impress anyone. That was the funny thing. And cut a long story short, after he left, they kept on talking about it, like, wow, that is so impressive. Like, they're not used to seeing people like that. And someday was someone even talking about, oh, I need to up my standards and all of that. And it was funny because I even got a bit jealous, and but it also motivated me to be more educated on a lot more things, because I was a bit envious of the fact that he was the center of attention. But yeah, I understand, like, maybe the men out there don't really care about impressing everyone, but if you think about it, it keeps things spicy with your partner. It sets a great example for your children as well. You never know what path they'll take, so being a well-rounded resource is a valuable trait. I'm not speaking for all men, but I believe this is something I and many other men should do or should strive for. It's about continuous learning, not just for yourself, but for your family as well as a whole. But yeah, I think we've come to the end of this conversation for now. I'm sure once we put this episode out there, where there are going to be a lot of follow-up questions, and they would like you back for another conversation. But before we end, I know you have books, so would you like to talk about that?
So I've written 7 books on eritology in Islam, on race in Islamic history, as well as on the history of Muslims in Brazil. So in terms of my books in relation to eritology or sexual intimacy for Muslim couples, it's a book called A Taste of Honey, Sexuality and Eritology in Islam, which is essentially a book is split into 2 parts. The first part looks at the history of sexual ethics and eritology in Islam, how a number of Muslim scholars spoke about the importance of learning about sex and intimacy and eritology, and what the Quran Hadith has to say about different topics in relation to beauty, desire, love, an intimate relationship in paradise. And then the second part of the book is more like a sex manual, where it's providing practical advice for couples in terms of what men generally desire in women and what women generally desire in men, according to what many classical Muslim scholars have said, as well as providing practical advice on love-making positions, oral sex for both the man and the woman, providing tips. I've got a chapter on orgasm, which it mainly focuses on the female orgasm and provides some tips in terms of how a woman can experience a female orgasm and how can she experience ejaculation. And then the book that chapter ends with a discussion on simultaneous orgasms and how couples can experience simultaneous orgasms together. So that's really what A Taste of Honey is about. Then I've got another book. That book came out in 2015, I believe, 2016, quite a while ago. Quite a thick book. See, it's like about 300 odd pages. So when that book came out, it did relatively quite well, but not as well as probably as I thought it would do. But I recently wrote my latest book. Is called Women of Desire: A Guide to Passionate Love and Sexual Lovemaking. No, A Guide to Passionate Love and Sexual Compatibility. Sorry, A Guide to Passionate Love and Sexual Compatibility. That's Women of Desire. And that's more like a concise guide specifically aimed at women who have desire and orgasm issues or challenges. And I wanted to kind of address them. I'm mainly speaking again from an Islamic or Muslim perspective. I'm talking about different things that we spoke about today about desire, high libido, FGM or female circumcision, how to overcome sexual trauma and things like that, or how to experience pleasure with their partner, how to connect and understanding men as well. But that was a really concise book, and I also provided a number of resources. So that's what this book is. So you can't see it, but Women of Desire. So and I've got another book called Kunyaza, which is my most popular book. It's a best-selling book. It's about an ancient sexual practice from Rwanda, which has the reputation of helping women experience multiple orgasms and female ejaculation, commonly known as squirting. I made a documentary with the BBC in 2020 around the book, and I attended one of my workshops. Alhamdulillah, it's doing really well. And yeah, they're the three main books that's linked to like sex and intimacy that I imagine people will be interested in. And then I've also forgot to mention, got an institute called the Eritology Institute, where I provide online courses covering a number of what we've spoken about today about sex, intimacy, men struggling with a number of issues, whether it's erectile dysfunction, porn addiction, and helping men connect with their partner. So that's the Eritology Institute. And like I said, so a lot of the courses is on there if people wanted to obviously delve a little bit deeper. That's a little bit about the work that I'm doing.
Okay. Alhamdulillah, I think we've come to the end of this conversation. Thank you so much for your time. This was really insightful, and I genuinely look forward to having you back. Jazakumullah khairan.
Jazakallah khair and barakallahu feek for inviting me, and yeah, hopefully we'll be in touch soon, inshallah.
All right. Thank you so much. Take care.